So full disclosure, this is my first talk at a conference like this, so I'm really excited to be here. And it's also a lot of people out there, so thanks for coming, and I'm really excited to tell you what I know about Vue and my experience using Vue. So I've been working in software development for about 8 years now, and I've been working with Vue on and off for about 3 years. And so my last job was the first place I used Vue at a digital ad agency, and it's been a lot of fun solving different problems with the framework. I work at Optoro now. It's been almost 2 years, and it's exciting every day. And so I want to talk about my experiences working with Vue, how I got started using Vue at Optoro, and how we use Vue in production today, because it's changed a lot since it started. So first up, just to help frame the discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about Optoro. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. Shout out the 2018 Stanley Cup champions. It's awesome. Yeah, hockey fans love that. And we also have a 300,000 square foot warehouse in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. So using those tools, we have one platform to manage and optimize our clients' retail returns. We work with big retailers like Groupon, Target, Bed Bath & Beyond, Lowe's, Best Buy, and Under Armour, and others as well. The first time we added Vue to production is actually a little under 2 years ago, and it just predates me by about a month or two, so I almost made it there for the first deploy. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. So our flagship product is called Optoro, and it's so much more than just another Rails backend. It helps power our warehouses distributed all over the US, and including the warehouse that we own in Tennessee, where we process inventory 24/7. The majority of our Vue code is deployed to Optoro as independent applications and integrate with the Rails backend to provide the experience of one seamless application. We also have a lot of our AngularJS apps deployed there side by side. If you wanted to be trendy and give this a name, you could call it micro front ends, but you have to use the air quotes if you do that. And with this approach, many different teams that we have can work on and iterate on the products that make sense for their business domains. This helps them move fast without worrying about stepping on each other's toes. Optoro also supports our e-commerce products, Blink and Bulk. Blink is for individual units. I like to think of it as the prices are so good, you'll blink and you miss it. Or Bulk is for bulk inventory, like the name describes. So all this means that we have Vue deployed across a broad range of use cases and devices with a lot of different users behind the scenes. So ultimately, our users include e-commerce customers, warehouse workers, and client employees. And so here's some of the outcomes that are supported by our technology. Sorry if that's not accessible. I know some accessibility folks out there might ding me for that, but like I said, first talk, I'll fix it in the next one. So we diverted, this is all last year, we diverted 1.4 million pounds of waste from landfills. We also prevented 8.3 million pounds of carbon emissions from optimizing shipping. And we recycled almost 180,000 pounds of products. And so this is what it's all about for Optoro. We're all about reducing waste in the retail industry. And our technology powers these results by reducing inefficiencies in the logistics of returns. So reducing waste can be beneficial for clients and the environment, and Optoro's mission is to eliminate all waste in the retail space by focusing on increasing the value of returns, lowering returns processing costs, and reducing landfill waste. And we're using Vue to help support all of that, so that feels really good to be a part of. All right, now that I covered some of the context of what we actually do at Optoro, I want to get started with how we got started using Vue, getting that into the mix. And so this is the backstory of how Vue was first introduced to the front ends in our code base. So as I mentioned earlier, Vue has been in production for almost 2 years on Blink.com. And I talked to one of the developers that actually introduced the changes to this. I tracked back the Git commits to do it all. It was really fun. And he described Blink as old school JavaScript. So there's no framework in there. There's a lot of globals that everyone just kind of passes around. And there's a lot of hand-rolled solutions for stuff as well. And so the reason he wanted to look for a framework was to add more structure to the application and kind of get rid of all of those old school behaviors. So this developer had previously used AngularJS and decided to try Vue after his experiences with it. And who's tried both Angular and Vue? Anyone? Awesome. Wow. That's almost everyone. That's great. So to quote him, and I think maybe people would agree, AngularJS just added so much complexity and cognitive burden to development. And I was thinking, where have I heard that before? So, oh no. Is that Wi-Fi? That's a tweet from, let me see if I can find it. Probably can't with no Wi-Fi, but that's a bummer. It's actually a tweet by Evan Yu, who said, don't let your application or your framework complexity overshadow your application complexity. And it's funny that I was actually talking to a developer last night from the conference, and he mentioned the exact same thing. So anyway, they ripped out oh no, the images are killing me here. So let me try to get on a hotspot. So basically, I'm trying to show you the homepage of blink.com and just showing you how small we sprinkled into Vue components just to get it started and get the ball rolling with Vue in general. Oops. Sorry, bear with me for a minute. There we go. All right, beautiful blink.com. So like I mentioned, it's an e-commerce website. Yeah, love the Wi-Fi. And let me just go back just to prove that I was talking about a tweet. There we go. So this was the tweet that I was going to show you. Anyway, yeah, there's familiar features on blink.com, like you have a search navigation or a search bar up top. You got category navigation and menus. So we were able to sprinkle Vue in the mix incrementally, and that's one of the best approaches that we've taken with Vue to get it into production. So we added a hook to all components or all elements that we want to initialize Vue on, and just basically look for all those elements on the page and initialize the Vue components. So it was a simple approach and didn't really take advantage of much of Vue's powers, but the user doesn't really notice that. The user doesn't care what it's built in. It's 2019, that still is the case. For example, way up there in the top, that's the login little area, and that component's built with Vue, and that's pretty much just an if statement. So even though it's not taking advantage of reactivity and things like that, it's still useful for just getting to try out things. And this one's a little bit more beefy. It just loads a bunch of featured sales in a dropdown, and it wasn't really obvious how to do this yet because there wasn't a CSS framework like Bootstrap to just grab this out of the box with. And finally, similar to that other if statement, there's another badge up there on the cart that does the exact same thing. It just indicates how many items you have in your cart and displays it to the user. So I haven't actually worked on this site specifically, but after talking with the developer that introduced Vue here, it's clear they were interested in continuing to develop more features with Vue. And I don't know the whole story for what is happening with this today. Like I said, I don't work on the website. But it was interesting that the incremental adoption approach was key to being able to try out Vue in production and trying out new things while still delivering value to the user. So key takeaways here are this is not an exhaustive flex your muscles approach to getting Vue in the mix. We added it in a small, low-risk spot to give it a shot and gathered some data from that. So what's important is that we were able to try it out and get it in front of users in production quickly. These features aren't necessarily business critical, but they are important to the user experience of blink.com. So if they were to fail or be released late, it really wouldn't impact a lot of business stuff, but they still have a lot of priority to get deployed because they won't be overlooked since they're important for UX. And I think one way I like to think about it is if you have a smaller blast radius, it can be small enough to either try it again, or if you don't like it or if it doesn't work like how you hoped it would, maybe you could ignore it completely without having to rip it out right now in case you don't have time, for example. So these are the small changes that started the Vue.js snowball at Optoro. And I think that's pretty incredible to look back on. All it takes is being first to production, and then boom, you can run it with it. And unfortunately, that's also what happened with CoffeeScript, but that's a different story. So now we have 14 Vue apps in production. And so since I've covered the context of where we started, let's get back into where we are today and what we're doing now behind the scenes as well. So last time I checked, this is how many we have. We're making new ones every day for different use cases, and they're all owned by different product teams in our tech organization. So I think we have between like 60 and 80 people on our engineering team that's spread across different disciplines like UX and quality engineers and things like that. So it's a testament to Vue's versatility and approachability, as a framework, and a special shout out to the documentation style guide. If anyone here works on that, major props, because they're great onboarding resources, and they also help curb bike shedding in the development process. So after Blink.com, we needed a way to get Vue into the mix side by side with our existing AngularJS apps on Optoro. So it was an unreasonable task to rewrite all these current tools because it would be way too much time to see new value being released with Vue. This required upgrading tooling of our front-end projects, and some of the developers that worked on that are actually in the audience today. Thanks for being here, guys. You're awesome. So it was actually a little bit different for each different place we used Vue. So Blink, Bulk, and Optoro all load Vue differently. Blink was just using static assets because that was the fastest way to get it there. I think they're committed to the Git repo, so try not to do that. We can add a ticket to fix that later. But Blink.com uses the Webpacker gem to integrate Vue into Rails. And we also wrap Vue in Android web views using a mobile SDK for hooking into native device features. But for Optoro, which is the most interesting part of this, I think, is we, since the different teams don't want their roadmaps trampled by forced upgrades or escape defects, for example, we have all our front-end code separated into a monorepo that is a gulp-based workflow that deploys each package or each client independently. Unfortunately, that was all tailored specifically for the AngularJS builds, so there's a lot of work done to basically just boils down to using NPM scripts everywhere. So NPM scripts are a great way to decouple how a project is built from what the thing that wants to build it is. It's a little abstraction that sits in between, and you can just create scripts however you want to call different functions in your app, or even custom shell scripts you want. You can put them in all of your NPM scripts. So what we did is we integrated the Vue CLI build scripts here, so we wouldn't need to rip out the existing system and can just start putting in new apps written in Vue. So throughout all of this, I learned the importance of paving the cow paths, or desire paths. There's different ways to say that, however you want to say it, but I like to think you gotta look for what's already there, and then you can use it and work with it. So to be honest, this is something that was harder for me to learn than I'd like to admit. I mentioned earlier my previous job was working for a digital ad agency, and that meant projects were fleeting and usually didn't need to be maintained after they were released, which is kind of like a developer's dream in a way, but it's kind of a big benefit of having greenfield projects. You try new things, you forget about your mistakes, and you move on. This is not the case with enterprise software, and I learned that very quickly. Like with Blink.com, we incrementally adopted Vue, so we still support our old AngularJS apps. And I don't know if we actually rewritten any, but if we have made strides to like reuse some components and stuff like that to actually start moving away from those old apps. But we also took advantage of opportunities to do maintenance on all of our apps. For example, we migrated everything away from Bower and toward NPM, so we're kind of modernizing our whole stack. And we also deployed an internal NPM registry, which is a favorite of mine among all the improvements that we made. So NPM has been awesome for us. One of the first packages that we published was a customized Bootstrap theme. We call it Optoro Improved Style Sheets, or Otis for short. And actually, I don't know if he actually named the dog after the framework, but one of our developers has a dog named Otis. So I thought that was kind of funny too. But now all our Vue apps import this package, and they can upgrade at their own pace as we introduce new components or change style themes. So no teams are going to be surprised when we release new stuff. However, we do lose a little bit of visibility here because that framework is in a separate code base than our application. So we integrated NPM and Slack to actually alert our developers when we release new versions of stuff, so they're aware of what's coming down the pipe. This is kind of like what I think about splitting out framework code from application code. And NPM helped us modularize that by sharing it easily across different projects, and then also versioning it. This way we can iterate independently of the application code, and each product team can upgrade at their own pace. It makes sense for us because with our use case with many different teams, they will suffer from unplanned work if they're forced to upgrade or spend time fixing broken styles they were not expecting. We don't ever force our users to upgrade the stuff, and decoupling the framework code from the application code is a helpful approach that helps us move faster here. All right, next up is Vue CLI. Vue CLI is absolutely awesome. Who's used Vue CLI for anything? Oh, nice. Maybe about as many people use Angular. I love that. So we are using it to improve cross-project consistency. This is basically the application templating part of Vue CLI. And previously, we were doing a very similar thing with AngularJS. I looked it up, and I think we were using like a Yeoman template, version 7.1 or 7.2 for Angular. It's just kind of fun to go back and look at what was there before after you made all these upgrades. And so we pre-generated a template from Vue CLI, just using the Vue CLI create command. And we made the adjustments we needed to make to get it in production. So that was stuff like the asset paths, et cetera, for actually deploying on our infrastructure. So this approach works, but it has some drawbacks. For example, it takes a lot of effort to maintain that. We have to regenerate the template and reapply the customizations on top each time we want to update. And so we're not getting fresh versions of the Vue CLI templates every time we create a project, for example. There's also no clear separation between a default Vue app and our customizations. And so this is especially bad when you're managing a lot of config files, because it's difficult to know what you need by default or what's changed for a specific use case. And that can be really hard for newcomers coming onto your project, because they don't really know what was changed for what reason, or if you don't need it anymore and it's outdated. So now we're exploring using Vue CLI plugins to provide this integration instead. So if you ever used Vue CLI before to create an app, and I think you all have, the prompts and options you have at the beginning when you're trying to actually create the thing, some of those are implemented as plugins, and they add dependencies and modify the project to support new features. So Vue CLI is extensible, and you can add your own plugins like this to do the same thing. And there's some in the community already, like there's one for Apollo, I think, for example. So the workflow we built for Vue CLI solves some of the issues I mentioned and simplifies app templating for our developers. First of all, I can't praise the design choices around Vue CLI enough. They're what made this possible, and it's so extensible, and again, the docs are just superb. It's really nice to work with. So instead of prompting the developers each time now, we have all of our stuff defaulted in a package. It's just a JSON file, really. The package is there for convenience that pretty much exports the file. So the plugin includes that file, so then all the defaults we have for our Optoro's development preferences are already picked for the user, and it's what we all agree on to move forward as a team with. So we do things there, like customize a Webpack chain to output a manifest, so our integration with Rails can actually read what files it needs to load, for example. We also do things like configure error reporting, our browsers list, and importing shared framework code, like the Otis library I mentioned. We import that into our app template by default now. And finally, at the bottom here, it's an NPM initializer. The Create Vue Optics app is similar to like how you would do like a Create React app, if you wanted to do that. It'd be weird. But it's pretty much just loading up our Vue CLI plugin with a preset all set for developers just to be able to run one command, npx create Vue Optics app, and then the name of the app. So this takes the pain out of maintaining application templates by leveraging Vue CLI's extensibility. A developer just needs to run this one command, and they have a brand new, up-to-date, production-ready Vue app. It's the same way you would call Vue create, so it's supposed to feel familiar for the developer. And as a happy side effect, we have an obvious place for developers to contribute shared improvements that our apps can take advantage of now. So this is a bare bones example of what an NPM initializer might look like. And I'll zoom in on the parts of this in a sec. It's pretty much just a wrapper around the global Vue create command, but it's customized to use the modules that I mentioned before. And so there's three main parts to it. It's pretty small though. It's maybe 20 lines if you were to concatenate some of those lines for less clarity, I guess. But the first part is just parsing the command line argument for the project name that the user wants to create. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I chose using Commander here. It's pretty easy to do it, but if you just Google around for like parsing command line attributes or arguments with Node, and you can do that however you want. So next, this is kind of the meat of the configuration. We choose what command we want to run. So if you want to build it with a different template, you can do that as long as you have the binary available. And you can like do some error handling here in a sec to like make sure that the thing's actually installed, or even check the version to make sure you're on a modern version of that. We also stringify the preset and pass it into the Vue command with the inline preset flag. So if you were just doing like the -- preset, you could send that to like a remote JSON file or maybe a local one, but the inline preset lets you do that with a string. And there's also a registry flag there. That's pointing to a local npm Vue.js instance. You can do that if you want. You don't have to, but that gets replaced with our internal private registry when we actually deploy the module. And finally, here we're just calling the Vue CLI command. It's spawning a child process that actually kicks off the Vue CLI create command. And we do some error handling to make sure nothing bonked during the install process. And at the end, we let the user know it was actually successfully completed. So after doing all this, I figured there might be a simple guide for a way to figure out, hey, maybe I could take advantage of a Vue CLI plugin as well. And so these are my recommendations. This is by no means like an authority at all. This is right or wrong. This is what I thought might be useful. So you could customize your Webpack process if you have a lot of Webpack dependencies or configuration you're already doing in your apps. You could kind of move that out of your app and modularize it to reuse it on different projects, for example. Also, if you're extending your projects with a lot of commands or you want to add another command to Vue CLI, for example, you can provide that in a plugin. It's a good way to hide bulky scripts away if you're forced to pass a lot of arguments, et cetera, et cetera. That's the reason I just kind of hid all those extra flags you needed to write. I didn't want developers having to do that every time. It was too much complexity. Also, this is what big benefit we're getting is cross-project consistency. So if you're templating a lot of applications and defining your own presets, it might help enforce consistency across those projects by using those presets by default. So all said, these tooling and workflow changes fit really well with existing tools like NPM and Vue CLI. And ultimately, just sharing code across teams is hard. Who's had a problem like this? Has it ever been hard for anyone to share code across teams? Yeah, a few. So we use Vue across teams all the time, but even if you have multiple projects, not necessarily multiple teams, it can still be useful to share stuff there as well. And Vue single file components are a big help for individual projects, but versioning and sharing the code by publishing it to an NPM registry hasn't been totally seamless for us, but it's been working really well so far. And we just kind of had a couple speed bumps. We had to migrate the registry, and that caused all the hashes to invalidate and stuff like that. Not a hard problem to fix, but it was just something that we had a learning experience with, I guess. So we also don't have hardline backend or front-end roles at Optoro yet. So there's no one specifically involved with maintaining all this stuff. So I think that's really important to make sure that just like we don't want our frameworks to introduce undue complexity, we don't want to burden our users and our teams with complexity of tooling. So we want them to have an easy experience using everything we produce. And if they don't, that's good feedback. Don't be upset by that. It's always a good thing that when people complain because they're passionate about this stuff. And that's good motivation to make it better for them. Find out what's wrong and fix it. And so Optoro applies the design thinking process to iterate on improvements like that. Side note, this is what open source developers and maintainers do every day. They volunteer their time to do it day in and day out. So next time you file an issue or open a PR, say thank you for their tireless work, making all of our lives easier using the software that they develop and maintain. All right, so I think these three big buckets here are things that were major contributors to Vue's success at Optoro. Right off the bat, the framework's docs are an incredible source of knowledge. The cherry on top is the style guide. I love the style guide. It's, like I said, it solves bike shedding. And being able to sprinkle in Vue where it makes sense for us and not moving too fast, but being very deliberate with our experimentation and our deliberate changes is what helps us a lot. The last one there, knowledge sharing, we do a lot of what we call code shops at Optoro. So if we have a new topic someone's interested in talking about or we're introducing new technology, we'll get all the developers in a room and just have an hour-long discussion for it once a week kind of thing. People can ask questions, figure out who knows what, and find and identify useful patterns that we might be able to share across teams. We also use the GitHub code review or GitLab as well, I think. They also have a code owners file. If you haven't heard of that, check it out. Code owners is a way for you to define parts of your application that specific developers would be really interested in knowing if you're changing. So they might be able to contribute more advice or might be pinged for reviews if they're tagged on that. So one example of success with Vue that we've seen is we released a new product for our first touch app in 3 weeks, commit to commit. So the developer is actually sitting right over there. What's up, Dylan? And he doesn't work at Optoro anymore, so we can like kind of badmouth him a little bit about this. But honestly, this was a super heroic effort. I was just really annoyed by the dev lead that said that because it was, congrats, it was a great job, but that's the, Wi-Fi again, that's the freaking headline for AngularJS. It's like, don't call it super heroic. Like, we're using Vue now, come on. So anyway, we've got a lot of progress we've made. We've got a lot more stuff to do, so really excited about keeping forward, getting rid of more Angular, and moving all the way toward Vue. So thanks.